was having lunch with my son the other day, and we were talking a little bit about his volunteer work that he does on the weekends. It's not every weekend. It's kind of a once-a-month thing where actually he and his mother go and work with our local school districts, and they do a food pantry sort of giveaway. And you know, families drive up and they pick up much-needed food and supplies, and they go about their day. We were talking about how they've been doing this for a while, and recently they've sort of changed the format. You know, you never really know what kind of food you're going to get. It's donated from the local food pantry, and so there's tables that have to be set up, and there's boxes of food and bags, and there's sort of this, you know, known but unknown distribution system of giving out food, bagging up the food, moving pallets, boxes, getting the materials and the foods to the families as they drive up, and so on. And so, you know, they have volunteers that rotate through constantly, you know, and it's run by a local organization, but, you know, there's not this training, and there's not this, you know, it's just a community thing that happens, and those who do it kind of know how to do it, and those who don't sort of have to figure it out. And so being the, you know, Dr. Burkett, you know, that I am, and I ask, you know, so what happens when there's an absence of leadership? What happens when there's no designated person to step in and just sort of teach others how to do it? And so he thought about it for a minute, and he was just like, well, I just kind of go and do what I need to do. You know, I've done doing it before, and so I know what I enjoy doing, and I know what has to be done, so I just kind of get in and do it, and then others sort of fall in line. And my wife will chime in, and she'll talk about the folks that they just kind of stand around. They're not really sure what to do, or maybe they don't have the confidence to know what to do, or, you know, maybe they're younger and they just kind of struggle with, is this the right thing to do, or what's my place in this? And maybe some of them are just standing around waiting on someone to give direction, which I've noticed is sort of maybe a trend for some of our younger populations as we've, you know, moved into standardized testing, and we have a lot of people that are just waiting to be told what to do. So I had a conversation with them about this concept of initiative. Like, where's the initiative? Where's the initiative to step into a role when there's a lack of leadership? So I wanted to spend at least a segment of the podcast talking about what to look for if you're in an organization, or you're in an environment, or maybe even on a smaller scale, maybe you're on a team that has no designated leader, or the designated leader is not doing a great job, but maybe you don't know. Maybe you're in a position where you're not quite sure. So I wanted to give you some information and some tips and tricks to sort of look around and go, is this happening to me? Is there a leadership void where you are? So let's talk about that. One thing for sure, that if you're on a team that's sort of lacking some leadership, is that there'll be a true lack of direction. You'll be able to tell this pretty quickly. Like, what are we doing here? Why are we here? What's going on? You know, there's no true termed priorities. There's no goals. There's no guidance. So one thing that I want to encourage you as you're working through your master's and doctoral programs, or just wherever you are, it's important to establish goals, and not only the goals, but benchmarks to measure your goals. So it's one thing to go, hey, we need to accomplish X, Y, and Z. That's great, but how do you know you're accomplishing X, Y, and Z? How do you know that you've got the right data in place to show that you've accomplished the goals that you've set out to achieve? So one thing about education, particularly education leaders, and this has been a trend since I've been in the game, is that we talk about data-driven decision-making, data. But the data that you collect should aid and inform the goals that you set for yourself. So it's important to set benchmarks. And I'm not talking about benchmark data or standardized testing data. I'm talking about, hey, how do we know in 3 weeks we've achieved what we set out to achieve? That will show you whether or not you have a clear direction in the work that you're doing in the organization or the team that you're on. So that's one thing to look for, a lack of direction. Another thing to look for is reduced morale, like how we feel about working where we're working. Now, this is called climate. We talk about culture and climate, the difference between the two all the time, but this specifically addresses the climate. And climate talks about how we feel. How do we feel when we're here? Do Mondays feel like Fridays, or are we really excited for Fridays because we know we don't have to be here for the next 2, hopefully 3 days if we have a long weekend? When people start to feel like they're not appreciated, they're not valued, their ideas aren't being heard, well, most importantly, that they don't feel supported, like the work that they do, they just don't feel right about it. I can tell you time and time again, even in the research that I've done on ineffective principles, the thing that comes up constantly is people need to feel valued in the work that they're doing. They need to feel appreciated. They want to feel appreciated. I mean, sure, yeah, we all show up and we all do a job because there's going to be a paycheck at the end of the day, and none of us are doing what we're doing if we wouldn't get paid for it. That's true. But there is an altruism to the work that we do, particularly in education, and we have to feel valued in the work that we're doing. Because sometimes for some people and the work that they're doing can be very challenging and very difficult. Take special education, for example. Imagine yourself in a classroom full of low-functioning autistic students for 8 hours a day, and they're struggling to do some of the most basic things that you think students at that age should be able to do. And there's one teacher and maybe one aide that is trying to accomplish those goals every single day, dealing with the frustrations and oftentimes the violence that comes with working with students who have those kind of challenges. They want to feel appreciated and valued, that the work that they're doing is important, and they need to be told that, and they need to be shared with them, and you need to work with them. So if you're on a team or an organization and people are just kind of like, yeah, you know what, it's just another day, man. It's another thing happening. I don't really know. You know, you start hearing conversations like that, maybe, just maybe, the morale might be down. The third thing I would look for is inefficiency. If you've got a leader in place that struggles making decisions, or maybe the decision-making process slows down and there's delays and you're waiting around like you can't get things done because the people ahead of you can't get their things done, and you feel like you're in a position where you're constantly waiting, you might be in a situation where there's just some inefficiencies happening. Now, that could be a variety of things. Inefficiencies in finance or processes or policy or bureaucracy. There's a variety of things. But sometimes there are leaders who get confronted with difficult decisions or decision-making processes, and they just won't do it for whatever reason. And you're sitting around throwing up your hands going, this is obvious to me. This is obvious to the rest of us. Why won't you just make the decision, make the choice, hit the button, hit enter, send the email, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. Just those inefficiencies of decision making, and sometimes can just create a blockage in the chain and unfortunately stop the organization from getting things done. And, you know, you could stop and think for a moment, the teams that maybe you've been on or maybe you've seen that are just kind of dealing with that inefficient, ineffective decision making. That might be too methodical or rest with too much with one individual in order to move the organization forward. Well, this might be an opportunity to look at, is there more a collaborative team making or shared governance model that would help sort of move these efficiencies along so that we can get our jobs done? So that's sort of where you need some leadership to figure out, where are the gaps? Where are we struggling? Where can we improve our processes and procedures? Because sometimes inefficiencies can really, really mess up your organization or even your team. The fourth thing I would look for is confusion. And this is part of the conversation that I opened up this segment with, talking about, you know, the charity with my son and my wife. Is there tends to be sometimes when they go and they work, there's a lot of confusion. There are some people that show up and they're not really sure what to do. And the reason for that is there's likely a communications breakdown somewhere. You ever been a part of a team or somewhere and you're just not really sure what you're supposed to be doing because you don't really know, like, hey, what are we doing today? Or what are we supposed to be doing? Like, is this right? Like, is this correct? And you're just kind of like waiting around. Like, we've got this thing coming up, but I don't know where's it supposed to be? What time does it start? Like, what am I supposed to do when I get there? That communication breakdown can really hinder your organization or your team. And this happens all the time. And again, back to my ineffective principal research, this is kind of another really big area that principals often struggle, is there's a communication breakdown, that sharing of information, that letting people know what they're supposed to be doing, how they're supposed to be doing it, or even just what's going on. You know, I mean, oftentimes there's stuff happening wherever it is that you work or whatever job that you're trying to accomplish, and no one is sharing information or giving anything out to people that they know what they're supposed to be doing. So communication is obviously very, very important in the moment. It's also important to share the right information at the right time, but that's a skill that comes much later. So if you're wondering, like, hey, what's going on here? Like, you might be a part of an organization that really struggles with good quality, clean communication. And the last one I just call it decreased innovation, meaning we're just kind of doing the same thing over and over and over again. We're not improving, we're not changing, we're not trying anything new, we're not listening to new ideas, or maybe we're in a situation where leadership's not interested in new ideas. Like maybe they're really happy with the status quo and they don't want to change things, because if people change things, then maybe they feel threatened by that change because there really is somebody better that could come along and take their job. This happens all the time. There are lots of insecure leaders out there that don't want to hear new ideas, or they stifle that innovation because they are fearful that they'll lose their job. Natural human response. But obviously that's not leadership. Leaders need to encourage new ideas. Leaders need to encourage innovation. They want people talking about, hey, look at these processes, look at these policies. How can we improve? Going back to what we were talking about, inefficiencies. This is a really good opportunity to listen to people and go, hey, how can we make this better? What can we do to strengthen what we're doing? How can we improve on what worked and what didn't work? That level of self-reflection is a real strong part of leadership that's often lacking, and I think it needs to be looked at. So not picking on my family's charity organization. They do a fine job. I'm very pleased with what they do. But it got me thinking about, what does that absence of leadership look like? Because in extreme cases, it looks like anarchy, where people are running around not knowing what anybody should be doing, until ultimately some person steps up and says, hey, let's take some direction here. But then you worry about whether or not that kind of direction is the right kind of direction. So sometimes the absence of leadership can really, really impact an organization if it's not handled correctly. But these are just some things to be looking for when you are living in a world and an organization where there's a leadership void. All right, welcome back. I'm excited to have my guest today is Craig Randall, and Craig is a counselor, coach, teacher, principal, author, trainer, consultant. He's also a podcaster, and he is the author of Trust-Based Observations, Maximizing Teaching and Learning Growth. And actually, he's training a school right now, so I'm excited to talk with him and find out what's going on. So, Craig, welcome to the School Rules Podcast. I'm happy to have you here.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Well,
Most of those jobs I don't do anymore, but I certainly did them all along the way.
hey,
So
but you're an educator, and that's our audience. It's all
for
teachers
sure.
and principals and educators, and that's our focus is educational leadership. So, with your background in education, please talk to us a little bit about your background and what led you to this concept you call trust-based observations.
Sure. It was an eclectic career for sure. I started as an elementary counselor, did that for 7 years, did 1 year in a severe behavior classroom as a counselor, physical restraint every single day, the craziness of that. Coached on the side, as a lot of us do in K-12. Moved into college, small college basketball coaching for 7 years. And though I love the coaching, the making a difference piece seemed to be missing. And my wife and I ended up going internationally and worked at an international school in Warsaw, Poland. And there, the elementary principal said, "Hey, Craig, I think you'd make a good principal." My first thought was the dark side, never. But then I was flattered, and so I found a program. This is 2007, so well before online, that was willing to work with my being gone most of the year and doing mostly summer classes. And really, in the supervision class, the very first day, the man that ran the course, who's now a dear friend and my mentor, said, "You have to be in classes every day. It's all about supporting teachers, helping them grow, making them better, focusing on their strengths, asking them what they were doing to help students learn, asking them what they might do differently." And we would practice with 10-minute mini lessons in class over and over and over. And when I go and present now, I'll always say, "Hey, have you ever..." done that in your programs. I've only come across one other person that actually practiced observation. And so really it started there. I got my first assistant principal job in the international school circuit in Korea. I told my boss, the principal, I had this crazy idea about observations. And he said, great, let's do it. And I didn't know anything about anything except this one thing, but teachers loved it right away. It was so different than their experience. I had old and new teachers saying, "You're the best principal I ever had." And I wasn't. It was just they felt heard
Right.
and they liked that we started by asking them questions and they liked hearing their strengths shared. And really, it just evolved and evolved, not really knowing I was evolving or creating anything until about 6 years later. And a principal I was working with said, "Craig, you need to protect your work." And I didn't even know what he was talking about.
Yeah.
And then I thought, wow. And then I thought I should present at a conference, and I did, and it went really well. I thought I should write an article, and I did. And then family circumstances, we came back home and we'd saved some money, and I thought I'd turn it into a book, and I did, and it came out during COVID. And but the last 4 years now, we've been training schools literally all over the world in trust-based observations.
So you got in, you built those relationships, you really connected with teachers. So talk to us about what is truth-based observation. What are you doing differently in the observation world that other principals aren't doing? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say the principals aren't trying to do it. I would say it's more the systems that are well intended, but but they work against what we're trying to do. And whether we're saying Danielson or Marzano or whatever versions of those type, we've got a rubric with a list of an enormous list of indicators that are usually rated on a 4-point scale. And the research says that as soon as we start to evaluatively grade teachers, they relational trust between us diminishes, and then they play it safe and don't take risks. And the research also shows from a Gates study and an Annenberg study, both really large studies, that this method of observing that we've been doing really since 2000 is not improving teaching and learning. And so what we do is we have a continuous series of 20-minute unannounced observations, and unannounced might sound scary, but when it's a strengths-based model and we don't rate pedagogy, teachers actually like it because they don't have to worry or don't have to put on the proverbial dog and pony show, which we know happens, which also means it's authentic talk about authentic practice, not about the pretend lesson I put on to impress my boss. Not to impress my boss, to tick the boxes would be more accurate.
Right, right.
We have a form that has 9 pedagogical areas. Research says more than 10, you lose the forest through the trees,
Mhm.
and you're not really seeing the craft and art of teaching. The form is highly detailed, though, and that allows us to be really, really specific with what we notice, which then ends up being specific praise, which ends up being a big trust builder. And so we see you once every 3 to 4 weeks, depending on our loads and what our school size is. And then the next day is really where the magic happens, and that's the reflective conversation. And it's all about building trust. Brene Brown talks about the connection between vulnerability, trust, and risk taking. She says vulnerability in itself isn't a bad thing. I kind of think of it like the amygdala. If it's a trigger that if vulnerability is too high, maybe something's wrong. And so she says the way you lower vulnerability so people are more willing to take risks, teachers trying new things in our instance,
Right.
is by building trust. She has a great analogy about a jar, and every little action you do is a marble that builds trust. And you want to fill that jar up. And when that jar is full, people are more willing to take risks. And so during the reflective conversation, it's really about the how, all the different things we do. And so I'll reference these as marbles now as trust. So the very first thing we do is we have the reflective conversation in the teacher's room, not in our office. We say whether you're 7, 17, or 37, getting called to the principal's office feels like getting called to the principal's office. And so they feel safer in their space. And it brings back better memories because they're in the space, so it makes the conversation richer. The next marble is when we get to the room. It sounds like a nothing little thing, but we ask permission. Hey, is now a good time?
Mhm.
I could say, hey, let's meet, but people don't really like to be told. That little courtesy, even though it doesn't change the answer, makes a big difference. The next marble is we sit beside you, not across from you. Psychological research on hierarchy in the workplace says when we sit across from each other, that magnifies that difference. When we sit beside each other, that minimizes that difference. Anybody that's had a teenage child that's been maybe sullen which would be my daughter for a few years, we know they don't want to talk to us during those years. But somehow they're in the car beside us and they'll start talking. It's not exactly the same, but there's some similarities. They just feel more comfortable sitting beside us. The next marvel is we're being totally transparent. Like we're looking at screens right now. Here's the form. I'm not hiding anything from you. The next marvel is we literally tell them what the goal of trust-based observations is. And we just tell them, look, the goal of this is for all of us that do observations in the building to build enough trust with all of you so that any one of us can come into your classroom, observe you, see you trying something new, and even though it's highly unlikely, have that thing you're trying be a train wreck. But as opposed to a traditional observation where you're thinking, freaking out because of all the rubrics and scoring, you're not going to be worried at all because you know the next day, the first thing I'm going to say when I come into your room is, Jerry, I love it that you were trying something new, high five or fist bump. And I say, because when we've created those conditions, what will you do? You'll persist in trying new things. And when we do that, we know we're going to improve teaching and learning, which is our most important job. And then we think the next thing we do is really a handful of marbles. And that's we don't start by telling, we start by asking. We ask those two questions. First question, what were you doing pedagogically speaking? What strategies were you using to help the students learn? And we add a trust marble even within that and say, we definitely want to hear about the 20 minutes you were in there. But we know sometimes when you come in, you'll think you missed the best part or you left right before the best part. And we say, if that happened, tell us too. It's amazing how often you'll hear teachers go, oh, thank God. And so we take down their answers,
Yeah.
we share it back with them, which demonstrates that we're actively listening. We actually work to reframe their answers into the pedagogical language of the form so they get more purposeful. The second question we ask is if you had the opportunity to reteach the lesson, what, if anything, might you do differently? We add another trust marble and we say, look, teaching is hard. Sometimes when we teach, we nail it. When that happens, we want to celebrate it. We never want you to feel like you have to manufacture an answer just because I'm asking this question. At the same time, we know most of the time we teach, we tend to think, I wish I would have, or next time I'm going to. And so then we do the same process there. And then we go through the form, and each little thing that we share is a specific praise. So we're focusing on strengths. And then we don't, except for egregious circumstances or like a new teacher's classroom management is struggling, we don't offer suggestions until the fourth visit because we want to fill that jar up first. And then even when we do, it's really, really supported, way more like a teacher would give feedback in a supported way to a student as opposed to, hey, I want you to get better at this, or hey, I want you to get better at this. Here's an article. And it's continuing support.
I was just saying, it
So
just sounds like pure instructional coaching. You were identifying the risks and the rewards, and you were celebrating successes, and you're coaching side by side.
I think though, and maybe it's opposed to maybe a traditional, maybe gym night coaching, which I'm not being critical of, where it's just left completely to the teacher
Mhm.
to what to do. We all have blind spots. So our lens is always those 9 areas of pedagogy and which one might be that area that they work on. So yeah, basically. So what we do though is you still have to be evaluated. And
Right.
so because we're not rating pedagogy, we just, I mean, and some of these are basically on domains on the element anyway, but they're not pedagogy. It's when you rate the pedagogy is where the trust gets damaged. So we do professionalism. Am I doing, showing up on time, turning in my grades, all that kind of stuff. How I get along with others, my mindset towards professional growth, and then planning and prep.
I appreciate you also saying that teaching is hard. Because I work with our clinical teacher interns here too. And I remind them that teaching is a practice, just like doctors practice. We don't like to think about it in those terms that they're practicing on us or that teachers are practicing on students, but it is still a practice. And you're going to have bad days and you're going to have great days, but it's always about pushing forward to improvement, the next big thing, the next big step. So, talk to me a little bit about that. How are you pushing even the newest teachers towards that improvement when they're coming into the game fresh, new, and making a lot of mistakes?
Like with a new teacher that's struggling, we wouldn't wait till the fourth visit if they're really struggling, because if learning's not going on, they're begging for help. What I'll say is our lens is those 9 areas of practice. So we're always thinking which one of these 9 areas, if I helped in a differentiated way, each teacher would help that person's teaching and learning most. So this really gets into that offering suggestions piece. So running through that, what we would do is at the end of the reflective conversation, again, we're going to ask permission to offer a suggestion. And it makes a big difference. If I tell you, just we don't like to be told, and it feels more like strategic compliance, and there's just not passion. But if I ask you, you're going to say yes, but your mindset shifts. And I can't explain the psychology behind it other than I know it works. Let's just run through and let's just say so. One of the areas on the form is working memory, cognitive load capacity. And so we want teachers to add in purposeful reflection, little mini reflection processing activities before they go over the cognitive load capacity of the developmental level of whatever group of kids they're working with. So let's just say I had a new teacher that wasn't doing that. And so they were going too long. And so the kids were, they're getting off task because they're not absorbing because they've overfilled their jar, right? So one of the things on the form that I think is really cool is it's hyperlinked to all these different articles for each area or even book recommendations. So PD's right at your fingertips. So I would use that as well. And so one of the areas in that area of the form on working memory is an article that has 78 different activities that could be the quick little reflection processing activities. So I'm going to have a hard copy and the soft copy. And then once they say, yeah, so I'm going to say something along the lines of, hey, Jerry, I have a suggestion on working memory cognitive load, especially the reflection processing activities. Would you like to hear? And then I'm going to say, great. I'm going to say, look, here's a list of 78 different ones. Let's pick 6 or 8 and highlight them that you think would really work for your group of kiddos. Okay, look, let's if you were just going to do this with one of your classes just to start with, one of your preps, whichever one, whatever it is, which one? Great, let's pull up that lesson, tomorrow's lesson. So looking at it, where do you think the natural stops might be, or where we could put in a stop to add that little reflection processing activity? Okay, which one of those 6 or 8 do you think would fit in best here? And then work our way through. And then we're going to say, great. So we're going to do this tomorrow. And there's 3 ways we could do it. 1, I can come and model it for you. 2, we can co-teach it. Or 3, you can do it and I can watch and I can give you suggested feedback either in the moment or afterwards. Which one would you want to do? Usually they choose the second or third one. So then we go in the next day and do whichever one. And then we have another reflective conversation. We say, what went well with the new strategy? What would you like to keep working on with the new strategy? And then the most important question is, what can I do to support you so by the next time I come see you, it's built fully into all of your practice, which kind of is a low stakes way of saying this is an expectation, but it's supported.
Yeah, and so I'm going to ask the question because I'm sure you get it in the training sessions that you're providing. As a busy principal, how do I find time to do these observations?
For sure. It's a great question. So I was talking with Kim Marshall a year or two ago, and we were both observation guys. And so we were talking about it. And he was telling me that in Chicago public schools, and they used a version of the Danielson model.
Mhm.
When you take the time for the pre-observation conference, the write-up I have to do after the pre-observation conference, the observation, the write-up I have to do after the observation, the post-observation conference, and the write-up I have to do over the post-observations for one formal evaluation, that's 6 hours. So for us, it's 40 minutes for one round, 20 minutes observation and 20 minutes reflective conversation. So we could do 9 observations in that time frame. With the part about the suggestions, it depends whether you have an instructional coach. You could hand that off to an instructional coach if that's there, or you can do it yourself if you don't have that. And sometimes maybe it's not 3 or 4 weeks because my load's too big. Maybe it's 5 or 6 weeks. And so we make adjustments for all of those things as well. But I'm going to add something else about it. Our most important job to me is doing everything we can to improve teaching and learning to best prepare our students for adult success. And so when you do observations in this way, you really feel like you're moving the dial. You're seeing scores improve. And this is maybe the most important part. When I have to observe in the traditional model and I have to rate or grade you, it's not very fun, especially if I know I have to give you something that's below proficient and you're not going to like that. Or if you're a really great teacher and even giving you a proficient is going to upset you. So if you can switch from that to teachers like sometimes getting tears of joy at hearing their strengths shared, at engaging in reflective conversations. When we finish a reflective conversation when we're training, we always ask teachers, hey, now that you've had a round, what do you think? They say 2 really common things. One, it just feels so nice to hear you say nice things about my teaching. I never hear that. And even more than that, they say, I'm already thinking about what to get better at without you even saying anything. So all of a sudden, if that's my experience as a principal, one, it's easier to, I enjoy it. So it's also easier to find time to do something when it's enjoyable. And I know I'm going to start to really move the needle.
I don't know that there's that good observation piece. And I'm sitting here listening to you going, gosh, even in our program, we train principals, and do we talk about walkthrough protocol? Do we talk about yeah, you have
Yeah.
T-test, which is really just evaluation. But
Yeah.
what about observation and improvement? What about walkthrough coaching,
Yeah.
those kind of things?
Yeah.
And so I appreciate you addressing that. I think it's amazing what you're doing. What's the teacher response like?
It's amazing. I mean, it's people people will say, I mean, one, I gave you a couple things of what they say, but they'll just say, before I would put on this show and put on this lesson and put in all this extra work, and I'd worry and worry and worry. And then when we have the conversation, I felt like I had to say everything in the Danielson way instead of really being able to talk about it. And it just feels so nice just to be able to just talk. It's just, we will get teachers that are teary-eyed with joy because it's so foreign to hear these models. When you build in rubrics that have to rate, certainly it creates a deficit mindset. I start thinking about what's wrong with you.
Mhm.
And so then I start thinking about you inadvertently. It forces me to think about you in a little more negative way. When I start focusing on strengths, it's so much easier to build from. But then they respond so much more. What we find is when we take the time to wait to the fourth visit, not with new teachers, right? But when we wait and that trust is built, that what was once a growth mindset that became a fixed mindset shifts back to a growth mindset again, and they find the joy in it. We were at a school in the UK, and the head teacher there was, she joined during COVID, and they'd had two insanely toxic heads before her. There were no observations during COVID, which was a common practice, and so the teachers felt this giant reprieve. So this new head teacher, she's amazing. Her heart's as big as Texas, and she is all excited about trust-based observations. The word in it, she thinks this is going to be a great way to change everything. The week before, she lets the teachers know this is going to happen, and they freak out. And she says, "Craig, oh my God, I don't think we can do this." And I'm like, "It's okay." And she said, "Can you just talk to them on Monday?" And so I talk to them. I tell them about what the goal of it is. So they try things, something goes awry. We're going to say, "We love it you were trying." And on Wednesday of that day, we observed the teacher that would generally be considered by all of the faculty and even herself as the most change averse teacher in the whole school.
Yeah, I know that teacher.
And they had had a Kagan cooperative learning training just a week or two before.
Okay.
And she did it, and it went really, really well. And she said during the reflective conversation, I never would have done that before, but I heard what you said on Monday, and I thought, I'm going to do it. And so she did it. It went well. And then when we asked that question, she said, we just want to be appreciated and heard. And this just thank you.
Mhm.
And then the next morning, though, the trainee school leader that led that observation process said, I have to tell you, yesterday I ended up leaving school. She was leaving at the same time. And she just said, today meant more to me than you'll ever know, and gave me a big hug. And that's really what we're talking about. That's impact.
You're out there, you're empowering teachers, you're you're coaching principals to make a difference and change, and actually and all of this ultimately leads obviously to student improvement, student achievement. And you've got some data to show that test scores are up in the school districts you've worked with. Tell us a little bit about that, and talk to us about how, anyone who's listening or watching can get a hold of you to learn more.
For sure. So look, it's been harder for us to get into public schools because of the laws, although there's workarounds and finesses. And so we do that. And I don't need to go into that right now, but we just got our first hard data back from a school in California. It is a economically depressed oil town about 30 miles west of Bakersfield, 80% free and reduced lunch, 60% Hispanic. When I went and observed them, it was super traditional teaching, well intended, but rows and lecture pretty much. And
Right.
after about 9 months of doing it, the teachers as a whole went to the principal and superintendent. It's a pretty small district, and they said, we need to change our teaching. And it was by going over the form over and over and over, even though it was a positive lens, they were just self-reflecting. And then now they've been at it where they just got their first result after they'd had a full year of implementation from one test to the next round of testing. And the percentage of kids that reached proficient grew by 7.25% in math and 12.75% in ELA. And so anyway, what we do is we train school leaders, and it's really about building mastery. And so, and we really recommend it. I mean, you can read the book, but a book can never make a system come alive in the same way that that does. So my website's trustbased.com, and my email is craig@trustbased.com. Anybody that wants to learn more is more than welcome to reach out.
Well, thank you, Craig, and I appreciate it. We'll certainly plug everything here on our sites and our side, and we'll put it into the podcast. Thank you so much for being a guest on the School Rules Podcast. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jerry. I had a good time.
Great. So I want to talk a little bit now about transformational leadership. Now, when you think of leaders, generally the great ones that come to mind are likely transformational leaders. These are the individuals that they're visionary. They've got a clear path that they want to take, a compelling vision. It's inspiring. They motivate their followers. And their vision is so inspiring and just amazing that followers are just compelled to go forth and help with that vision because they're so great at communicating that vision because they just in their mind they see it so clearly. Transformational leaders are also very caring. They care about the individual, not just the vision, but the people that are part of whatever it is that they're trying to do in the organization or whatever the vision is. The transformational leader understands that the individual people and their needs, the followers, are going to be part of that. So they have a genuine concern for individuals. They also tend to be brilliant. They're very, very smart people, intellectually smart, maybe well educated, maybe even educated with the streets, but it doesn't, wherever that is, it's part of that intellectual capacity is their creativity, their ability to change a narrative and the way things are thought about or approached, asking those critical questions, or maybe even making statements that just make you think a little bit differently. Because again, these folks are very good, amazing communicators, and because of that, they're inspirational. They're people that you can look up to, you can look to for for making change happen or moving an organization forward. And because of that, as you can see how these things are connected, they have influence. So there are lots of people that fall into this category. And if you were to Google transformational leader, you'll see a list of people that are considered transformational. And that's why they're called that. And you think about it, transformational, these are individuals who are poised to transform an organization to move forward. While leadership obviously is a learned trait, otherwise we wouldn't have entire degrees on it and amazing books. People can learn to be leaders. You can learn to be a leader. But transformational leaders, it's almost like the upper echelon of leadership. And these individuals have a talent for it because of all of these qualities, to be visionary and to care about individuals and have that inspirational, communicative capacity about. When we talk about transformational leadership, and I'm sure you have someone in mind that you're already thinking about, juxtapose it with another term called transactional leadership, which I hesitate to call it the opposite of transformational leadership because it's not exactly an opposite, but transactional leadership sort of emphasizes the need to keep things the way that they are. They don't focus as much on the relationship that transformational leaders do. These are folks that they have a set of established goals, and we're just going to meet those goals because they probably meet the needs of that individual leader. They don't meet the needs of the many, they meet the needs of the few or the individual. It's very a quid pro quo kind of relationship. You give for me, I give back for you. Before we really started to study leadership as a trait, many of our governments and our corporations are sort of operated on a transactional model. You give, I give, you show up and give time, I give you money, or you show up and vote, and then I take care of you. You can kind of see how there are some governments that were sort of set up on a transactional model. And there are a lot of leaders in the world today that still believe in a transactional model. But true great leadership is rooted in a transformational sort of style of leadership that, if anything, we may not be able to fully attain it for some of us because, again, some of the great leaders of the world that we know in our history books that we've even built statues to and monuments and have museums for, these individuals are truly transformational. So I encourage you to Google that term, just to get a sense for who are we talking about, and then read about that person, read about that individual and the things that they did in their lives that would serve them as a transformational leader.